All right. Last, but certainly not least, we have a good friend of mine from Harvard University, Professor Julia Minson, who's a professor of public policy at the Kennedy School at Harvard. She received her PhD from Stanford in psychology. Her work is on all things about disagreement, in particular thinking about how you can make disagreement work better, and in fact has founded a firm to do that, called Disagreeing Better. She studies lots of areas of trying to make opposing views, get people to engage with opposing views, and positively engage with opposing views. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, everyone. How are you doing? Good. Great. Okay. So as Nathan mentioned, I am a social psychologist by training, and I have spent most of my career studying how people can have thoughtful, productive, engaged conversations, even when their views dramatically disagree. Now, thankfully, the world has given me no shortage of opportunities to study what I like to study. When we think about disagreement, mostly we think about politics these days, right? But obviously people also disagree with their friends, people disagree with their family members, and certainly we disagree in the workplace. And so, as a lifelong academic, when I see like a massive problem that's tearing democracy apart, what do? I write a book about it. So this is How to Disagree Better. You all have received a copy of it. I hope you find it useful. What I want to do with the next 20 minutes is just highlight 3 key ideas to sort of orient you to how I think about disagreement, and some thoughts that have just sort of emerged from 20 years of doing research in this space. So the first idea that I think is tremendously important is that people underappreciate the fact that disagreement and conflict are 2 different things. And the reason this matters is because there's a huge academic literature on how disagreement is actually good for us, right? So we know from research in organizational behavior that, when we give heavy consideration to perspectives that are very different from our own, we tend to make better decisions. We avoid some truly, truly catastrophic errors. We are better at literally predicting the future. People who have opposing perspectives in organizations and feel that those perspectives are being heard are less likely to quit their jobs. They have higher organizational loyalty. Engagement with disagreeing views tends to prevent conflict. And just like every other thing that social scientists have spent decades studying, there's somebody 100 years ago who said it like better and pithier. This is William Wrigley Jr. of like Wrigley's Chewing Gum and Wrigley's Field. And way back when he said, when 2 men in business always agree, one of them is unnecessary. Okay? And that is deeply true as it was 100 years ago. It is similarly true today. But sort of here's the problem, right? All of this sort of research and practitioner wisdom notwithstanding, people avoid disagreement. People find it aversive. It tends to cause us a lot of problems. And this is where I think it's useful to think about the distinction between disagreement and conflict. So disagreement is a difference in beliefs, preferences, or expectations. Right? I believe that this candidate is going to be the stronger hire than this candidate. I prefer having our corporate retreat in this location and you prefer having it in that location. I think this product will perform well and you think it will perform poorly. Those are all disagreements. We can have all of those conversations thoughtfully, respectfully. We can learn from each other. We can benefit from each other. We can even have fun, right? Conflict is disagreement plus, okay? So you start with disagreement, and then what happens is you make a set of attributions for the disagreement. Why is this person disagreeing with me? And if the attribution you make is that no well-informed, intelligent, sensible, good human being could possibly be believing this thing that you're claiming, then we're on the way to conflict. Right? Because once I make that negative set of attributions about you, the natural thing to do is to try to change your mind. Right? I'm going to fix you. I'm going to inform you, and then you're going to be grateful to me because I just made you a better person, okay? And, well, you might not feel exactly that way about it, right? So as you fail to be fixed, I might get frustrated, right? You are going to try to persuade me in return. You might get frustrated, and then we have this escalation of negative emotions that people normally associate with conflict. So I think this distinction is really important to understand because what it implies is that, especially in organizations, especially for decision makers, disagreement is good as long as we can keep it out of sort of the conflict sphere. Now, the second point I want to make is sort of good news, which is that some people are better at this than others. When I started my PhD, I knew from just, being a human in the world that some people are better at this than others, right? You talk to some folks, and when you disagree with them, they're like, that's interesting. And you can almost see the wheels turning in their head because they're thinking about what you're talking about, right? Whereas other people are definitely not like that. And so I thought this thing must have a name, right? We should be able to measure it, and once we're able to measure it, we should be able to increase it. And so this is how I began my work on receptiveness to opposing views. So receptiveness is a person's willingness to access, consider, and evaluate supporting and opposing views in a relatively impartial manner. It's a mouthful of a definition. I'm sorry, I'm at Harvard. We like really long definitions. But what it really sort of highlights is that people, when they encounter new information, at every stage of information processing, tend to be biased towards things that support their current beliefs and against ideas and evidence that contradicts their beliefs, right? And so being receptive means that you're kind of doing much more, even Steven processing, right? You're seeking out information that contradicts your beliefs. You're taking some time to think about it, and you're evaluating it with the same yardstick as the yardstick you apply to your own views. The thing that's very important to notice is what is not here. And what is not here is any mention of compromise or agreement, right? Or meeting in the middle. So you don't have to meet in the middle to be receptive. You can listen to somebody, think hard about what they have to say, recognize some merits in their view, potentially recognize some flaws in your own view, and then say, look, I got you. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate how a person in your position or a person in general might hold your views, but I have more evidence for my own beliefs, right? So I think the evidence supports my side, right? Or my beliefs are more relevant to the people I care about, or my beliefs are more relevant to the future I imagine us having, right? So receptiveness means that you have thoughtfully engaged with a different perspective. It doesn't mean you have to change your mind. So we developed the construct, and then we developed a measure to evaluate the construct. We spent a long time trying to measure the scale, develop the scale, measure receptiveness, validate the scale. We published it in a journal called Management Science for the academics in the room. Big deal, fancy journal. We were very pleased with ourselves. And then we realized that nobody reads academic journals. So we put it on a website, okay? So this is disagreeingbetter.com/survey. You can take it yourself. Don't do it right now. You can give it to your kids. You can give it to your team. You can do it in your community. It's a good way to start a conversation about what's easy and what's hard about being receptive. If you want to have a totally wild Saturday night, what do you guys think I'm about to say? What I'm about to say is give it to your spouse and see how receptive they are. So it's a good conversation starter. So after we've done this for a while, we've learned a few things about receptiveness. On the decision-making side, it sort of acts exactly as it should. because that's how we design the scale, right? People who are more receptive consume information for both sides more evenly, so they just become better informed people. What's interesting is that there's some nice interpersonal benefits to receptiveness. So all of us have professional networks, right? We have people with whom we hang out at work, who we ask for advice, who we ask for help. All of us usually have professional networks that are biased towards the type of people we ourselves are, right? So liberals are friends with liberals, conservatives are friends with conservatives. That means that for any one of us, we are foregoing half of the information and half of the opportunities that might be available to us if we talk to both sides, right? People who are more receptive tend to have more diverse professional networks, so they're getting more opportunities to interact with people. We also know that people who are more receptive are more attractive collaborators and advisors. People want them on their teams. People want to have conversations with them, perhaps because they experience less negative affect and disagreement, right? So they're just calmer when you disagree with them, which makes for easier interactions. So having done this work, I was sold. I was like, okay, receptiveness is good. Let's get more of it in the world. And so we started running a bunch of studies about increasing receptiveness. And that's where we started having a lot of problems. Because the standard that we set for ourselves was, is there something I can do that will make one person more receptive, such that it actually improves the conversational experience of their counterpart, right? In other words, if I put you in a study and I say, be more receptive, and then I ask you, were you more receptive? You'll be like, yes, definitely, right? And so that doesn't count. We have to have a higher standard. And so the higher standard is, I do something to you that changes your counterpart's experience. And so we ran study after study where we did things to people that we thought would make them more receptive, right? We told them to take their counterpart's perspective. We told them to exercise intellectual humility. We told them to have greater empathy. And literally none of it worked. I started worrying for my academic career. My husband started worrying for our mortgage. And then we realized how conversation really works. And here's how conversation really works. This is like toll mechanics, so it'll be super intuitive as soon as I kind of lay it out for you. So imagine you have two people. Imagine these two people have some sort of disagreement, right? They have a history where they know it's not going to be an easy conversation, but they have to talk to each other again, right? Let's say they're colleagues. So this is you, and this is your partner. And so you say to yourself, I am going to be receptive to his perspective. I'm going to exercise intellectual humility and feel more empathy than I normally do, because you know this is good for you. And so you come into the conversation with good intentions, right? But you come into the conversation, and the next thing that happens is he starts talking. And that's where your good intentions kind of fail you, right? So you're not maybe completely failing, you are still more receptive and more empathetic than if you hadn't been doing anything at all, right? But emotional regulation is hard. And so you shouldn't feel bad for having half or 70% of the intended mental state that you planned initially. The next problem is that whatever amount of receptiveness you achieved in your brain, you still have to show outward because your counterpart can't read your mind, right? And so you have to send some kind of signal that says, I am trying hard to be empathetic over here. Because you're not a trained actor, your signals are going to be a mix of stuff, some of which is right, some of which is wrong, all of which is sort of inconsistently delivered, right? So then your counterpart is looking at this. They're seeing something in front of them. but they're also a person in conflict, right? They're also stressed out. They're also imperfect. And so what they're doing is they're processing what they're seeing through sort of the lens of their own biases and their own expectations and their own stress. And so in the end, you get what I think of as sort of a leaky pipeline, right? Where information is going in one end, but what's coming out is a very, very diluted version because a bunch of the information has leaked out along the way. And so this brings me to my third and potentially most controversial point, which is that in conflict, you get a lot more credit for observable behavior than for thoughts and feelings, okay? And that is very important for how we try to improve conflict communication, because most of the time, we are starting at the very tail end of the pipeline. Right? So if we take this model seriously, what it means is that intervening on people's intentions is a lot less effective unless they're really good at turning those intentions into visible behavior. And intervening on intentions is what we do most of the time, right? Most of the time we're saying, you need to be curious, right? You need to be empathetic. You need to take the other person's perspective. All of those are things that happen in your head, right? So what we should be doing instead then is intervening on behavior, because behavior is the thing that's the closest to what we're actually trying to impact, right? Which is perceptions and the other person's experience in the conversation. Which then leads to the obvious question of, what is the right behavior, right? Like if I told you to just jump up and down during the conflict, that's behavior, it's visible, it's probably not the right behavior. So what a lot of my research has pivoted towards, and what the book is largely about, is the idea that the most visible and the most interpretable behavior in conversation is language. It is literally the words and phrases we say. So based on sort of this model and our many failed studies, what we ultimately started working on is the idea of receptive language, right? So I talked to you about receptiveness and what it is and what it isn't, but now what we're studying is what are the words and phrases that make the other person feel that you're being receptive to them. In some sense, I don't actually care if you're receptive or not, right? What I care about is your counterpart's experience that you are thoughtfully engaging with their perspective. The way we do this work is very much bottom up. We take thousands of transcripts of people in disagreement, and we use natural language processing to identify specific linguistic acts, words and phrases, that increase participants' perceptions of having been heard, right? So what we're literally producing is words that people can say and words that people should avoid saying. What we now know is that using receptive language strongly predicts conflict outcomes. So because we have an algorithmic measure, we can take text, we can measure the presence of receptive language in the text, and then we can see what happens next, right? And so you can see, how likely are you to call somebody a nasty name during that argument, right? How likely are you to see them as objective or reasonable or the kind of person you want to work with in the future as a function of what they said in the beginning? And so what we find is that using more receptive language increases the quality of the conversation. It's easy to train because it's not years of therapy, right? Years of therapy are great, right? Nothing against it. But if you are in the middle of a difficult conversation and you need a shortcut, this is a good shortcut. And finally, what we've learned over time is that conversational receptiveness is effortlessly reciprocated. In other words, people mimic all sorts of behavior, right? So people, penguins, meerkats, songbirds, like tiny toddlers, all mimic each other naturally. It's a very low-level psychological process. Receptiveness in that sense is not super special. But what it does is it gives us a tremendous amount of agency over our conversations, right? I don't need to demand that people listen to me. I can model receptiveness and expect that through mimicry, I am going to get receptiveness back. So this is sort of a really important strategy, especially if you're a leader and you are in a position to influence lots of people every time you interact with somebody. So to me, this is sort of a very powerful set of tools to improve how we have conversations. The details are in the book. You all have the book, so I'm not even selling books anymore. And I will take a few minutes to take some questions. Thanks, guys. Yeah, go for it.
So I'm a big believer in DBT. I did DBT and it was life-changing, and one of the concepts is this idea of kernel of truth. And so, you know, when you're arguing with someone, there's a kernel of truth that you both believe. And I've been trying to figure out how that applies to the work that we do with customer insights and analysis of data, and what that looks like when either you disagree with the data, that what you see is sort of against your intuition, or even when you know the client is going to disagree with the data. So I'm curious, and this is a bit of a meta question, but if you have any perspective on sort of like, what does disagreement look like when on the other side of that is data and not humans?
I spend most of my life disagreeing with data, right? I mean, this is research. It's like, it should have been this way, but it turned out this way. My PhD advisor used to say, there's no such thing as bad data. There's only researchers who don't understand their own data. Which, like I'm adding philosophy to your philosophy, which is a little bit to say that inquiry is still the solution, right? If you look at something and it doesn't make sense, in my mind, whether that something is a person or a data set, you don't throw it away and say no good. You say, what's the difference? Right? How was this produced differently? What assumptions am I making that aren't being met? What am I misunderstanding about the analysis, the process, the customer, like whatever it is. But inquiry is the same, is still your friend, whether you're talking to people or a data set or people who produce a data set.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about body language? What about the interaction between the language and the body language? And sometimes our emotions come up, we get flushed maybe, or like things that we can't even control. So even if I don't actively cross my arms and I am trying to be more open, but like something emotionally takes over and I can't hide that.
Yeah, awesome. I love this question because I know that like 70% of you are thinking it. Thank you for voicing it. So body language is good in the sense that it's external, okay? It's less good than language because it is far easier to misinterpret, right? So people misinterpret words all the time. People misinterpret body language even more frequently. So you gave the example of being flushed, right? Like, am I flushed because I'm embarrassed? Am I flushed because I just ran here? Am I flushed because I'm angry? Am I flushed just because I, had a glass of wine? Who knows, right? So body language is hard to control, which is exactly the example you gave, right? And it's hard to read. So I would say that to the extent that our attention is limited and we're generally bad at all of this, I would put my effort into the more interpretable thing. Yeah.
Given what we were hearing earlier about video glitches, is there, how do you manage a video call where conflict is going badly?
So there's some great research on how different conversation modalities impact the quality of a conversation. And interestingly, the big distinction is between voice and no voice. So in-person, phone, and video are all superior to, writing a letter, writing an email, or writing a text. And it turns out that the reason for that is that when people are forced to speak in real time, they use more receptive language. Like, it is harder to be a jerk live when you hear another person listening to you. It is far easier when you're typing.
All right, we are out of time. Thank you, Julie.